Hey guys, this is 𝐄𝐝𝐻 from Edureka. Welcome to today's session on virtualization. Before we start into the topic, let's just go through the agenda. The first thing we see is what is virtualization, followed by how does virtualization work, its features, the architecture diagram, the types of virtualization, the benefits of virtualization, and followed by we end it with a future scope of virtualization in the industry today. Also, if you like our video, please do subscribe to the Edureka channel, and if you're looking for an AWS certification, then please check the link in the comments below. So what exactly is virtualization? Now, virtualization, if you think about the word virtual means something which is not physically tangible, which you cannot touch, which is virtual. So virtualization is the process of creating services such as memory, storage, networks, and even operating systems with using already available physical resources. So it basically allows you to create more IT resources which are necessary for the organization using already existing physical resources. Next, we have the fact that virtualization allows the physical machine to be used in its full capacity. So there are many machines which are not used to its full capacity. Maybe they're used to 10%, 20%, 30% of their capacities. Virtualization allows the user to use a machine in their full capacity, which basically increases efficiency. So this enables business agility for the company, and that is why everything that is done using virtualization is efficient. Next, we come to how does virtualization work? So here we see an example of server virtualization. What happens when there are three servers? Let's say a web server, a mail server, and a legacy app server. So according to you, the legacy app server is a very important server. It contains all your applications and the needs that you have. So there are three servers which are functioning at 30% capacity. Now a hypervisor is like an interface between the physical and the virtual environments. So the hypervisor enables virtualization to take place. It emulates the virtual environment and divides it from the physical environment that is there. So once you have a hypervisor on these three servers running at 30% capacity, and once you virtualize these, you can see that there are three servers acting in one server, like the legacy app, the mail server, and the web server will act as one server working in 90% capacity. So that means you basically save a lot of money on servers. You increase the efficiency of the server, and that is why you increase business agility. So this is what hypervisor is. How does it work? So hypervisors are basically used to emulate the underlying hardware that is there in the physical environment, right? So that to emulate the physical environment to the virtual environment, hypervisors are used. That can be application, storage, memory, input, output, or anything as such. So the result of using hypervisor is server virtualization. So here we can see that the architecture for hypervisor is given. So right at the bottom, we have the host hardware, the physical hardware that is present. And on top of that, we have the hypervisor. So that is something that emulates the underlying hardware in the host hardware, and it emulates it to the virtual environment. Then we see the hardware on top of that, the emulated one, and the guest OS. So that is the emulated operating system that you have and the applications that run on the operating system that is emulated. That is basically called a virtual machine. Next up, we have the features of virtualization. Now, virtualization has many features. Let's go through some of them. Now, rapid deployment. So rapid deployment means that you can basically deploy virtual resources like storage, like networks, etc. very quickly. So it does not take time. If you want to do it without virtualization, if you want to deploy physical resources, it takes a lot of time, and that is basically not good for your organization. Next up, we have reducing hardware costs. So hardware costs are automatically reduced because you do not use physical resources here, you use virtual resources. And next up, we have partition and security. So you can basically partition your physical environment and your virtual environment using a hypervisor or a virtual machine, anything of that sort. And that is basically separating your virtual environment and your physical environment. So when you're basically making the virtual environment, you need to allocate resources. Now, resources can be allocated using either your fixed allocation or dynamic allocation. So fixed allocation means that the virtual environment will use the fixed memory allocation that you have given it. But on dynamic allocation, the virtual environment can expand its memory allocation as and when necessary. And the fact that the entire thing is centralized. So it is all centralized. Everything that's going on in the virtual environment is centralized. So next up, we have the architecture for virtualization. So here we have two types of architectures. So first you can see that on the bottom layer, there is the host hardware platform that is there. So that is the physical hardware that is present. Then on top of that, we have the emulator, which is the hypervisor that is present, which is used to be the interface between the physical environment and the virtual environment. On top of that, we have virtual machines, which have containers in them. So each virtual machine has a guest OS which is being hosted by the system, and there are different apps running on these various OSs as well. Now, sometimes this is just for, let's say, server virtualization or desktop virtualization, stuff like that. Sometimes thing that happens is the second part. Along with the host hardware, there is another host OS which emulates as well. Here you have not just hardware emulating, but you are emulating the guest OS as well. So the next thing we go to is types of virtualization. Now there are various types of virtualization. One of the types of virtualization is network virtualization. An example of network virtualization is the virtual LAN that is there. So that basically separates the LAN, and that is a subsection of the LAN that is present, and that is a type of virtualization that is there. So that allows you to basically create other networks that are subsections of the LAN as well. Next up, we have storage virtualization. Storage virtualization allows the user to basically create multiple memory and storage devices virtually so that the memory is allocated separately. Next, we have desktop or OS virtualization. Now that allows the user to basically use their operating system as a host and host various other operating systems to be used in the virtual machine. An example of that is Virtualbox. Application virtualization is basically where you virtualize your applications that you use, the resources that you use. That may or may not be on a guest OS, which is being hosted. And finally, we have server virtualization. Now, in server virtualization, what we saw is that various servers can be basically virtualized to use as one server so that the capacity at which the server is running is very high, and that is improving its efficiency. So the main goal of virtualization overall is always to improve the efficiency of the physical resources that we use. Next up, we have a demo on Oracle VirtualBox. So when you type VirtualBox here on Google, you'll get to see something like this. So you click on this and we will basically be redirected to this. What you have to do here is you have to go to downloads. And if you're using a Windows host, then you can basically download it for Windows or Linux or Solaris or a Mac. So we'll download it for Windows. I have already downloaded it and installed it as well. So after installing, it looks something like this. So this is what VirtualBox looks like. Now what we have to do here is basically use another OS. So we are basically hosting another OS using this software. So here I am going to go to Ubuntu. Ubuntu is the OS that I'll be using in my VirtualBox. So you go to download and you see the versions of Ubuntu that you can have. So we download the Ubuntu desktop version, and this is what we download, the 20.04 LTS. And since it's going to take some time because it's around 2.5 GB, we have already previously downloaded it and it is here. So this is the image that is there, the ISO file for the Ubuntu that is there. So this has to be copied into VirtualBox. So let's get going. So you open VirtualBox, you go to new, and basically here you type the name, and here's basically where the machine folder will be. And this is the type of VirtualBox OS that you will have. So here you type, let's type Ubuntu 20.04. Now, VirtualBox automatically changes this to Linux and Ubuntu 64-bit. You can change it to 32-bit or whatever according to your system settings. Then you go to next. Here you can basically choose the memory allocation. So I will keep it to this. Always go for the green ones. This red part here is where you don't want to go. And then we go to next. So keep these as they are and you create. The VDI also has to be same. So you create next. And here the memory is either dynamically allocated or fixed. So dynamic allocation will allow the Ubuntu OS to basically dynamically allocate memory automatically, and fixed size of memory allocation will have the fixed size. So here is basically where your folder will be, and this is around what we'll have as the size of the file, and we create that. Now this has been created. What you do now is you go to start. So now that you've basically done this, you go to settings. Now this is a general description of what your OS is going to be like, and you have to change this to bidirectional. Now what this does is basically it helps the OS to share files with the host OS as well. So that is why you need it to be bidirectional. Here you can keep a description. Here you can have disk encryption. Now this is, we keep it this way. Then we move to system. Now here is basically the kind of things that you've already done, and we go to storage. Now here you go to empty, and what you do here is, so this is what VirtualBox looks like, and we have already downloaded the disk image for Ubuntu. So here we start with new. So here we have a name for the OS we want. This is the type, and this is the version of the OS we want. So we want Ubuntu, let's say 20.0.4. If you go to next, so here we allocate the memory size that we want. Always do not cross the green line because that might cause problems. This is as it is. This does not change. The virtual disk image does not change. Keep it as it is. The dynamic allocation does not change. And we decide the file size that we want, at least 100 GB for me. You can do it as per your wish, and we create. So here we have Ubuntu 20.04. Now we go to settings before we start. So this is the basic settings that are there, Ubuntu 20.4. We go to advanced and change this disable to bidirectional. So what changing drag and drop and shared clipboard to bidirectional does is you can share files from the host OS to the guest OS as well. So that is very important for you to do. Next up, we have the description and the data encryption, which you can do or leave. And we move on to the system. Now the system here is fine. You don't need to change this. All of this is as is. You need to go to processor. Now by default, VirtualBox has one CPU allocated to you. So we can change that to, let's say, 4, and keep that as is. Then we move to storage. Now here what we see is, go to the controller ID that is empty. You click on the CD button here and you choose a virtual disk file. So you go to the optical file here, you choose a file, go to Ubuntu, and what you do here is you take this and you copy it in here. So paste that here, and you find the file that you need, you select it and you open it. So now you have the ISO file that you need. So now you go to OK, and that should be that. And now you start. So basically it takes a bit of time for Ubuntu to be set up, and you could just close these. So basically this is the Ubuntu being set up in your virtual machine, and it takes a bit of time. So you've got to wait for that time. And so this is nearly done, and we have to wait for it to turn it to 100. Now this takes a bit of time and it depends on your system really, but you have to be patient with it. So once that disk has been read, you can basically see this on your screen. So you can choose and install Ubuntu. So that is in the English US. So that depends on what language you use. Go to continue, go to normal installation, click this as well, and go to continue. So you've already read that disk image from VirtualBox and you've basically, so here you choose erase disk and install Ubuntu, but since you're using it in the VirtualBox, it doesn't really erase anything. So you can choose this and you go to install now. So that is all you have to do. Now you have to click continue. So you can choose advanced features if you want, but I haven't here, but that is an option that you have. So here you have an option of selecting which area you're close to. I am close to India, so here you basically write your system name. Let's say Ubuntu system. Here you don't have to have VirtualBox as such. You can just name it as Ubuntu system itself. And this is the username. So you can have any password. So you can choose either login automatically or use the password to log in. So then you go to continue, and once you do that, you can see that the installation of your Ubuntu OS is taking place. Now that needs some time as well. So more or less, I think the Ubuntu installation is nearly done and it's just a matter of time. So as you can see, they've almost finished copying the files, and as soon as that is done, they're going to install the system. Now this entire process takes up some time, and as soon as the installation of the system is complete, the Ubuntu system for you, Ubuntu 20.04, will start running on your VirtualBox. So the files have completed copying and now the system is installing. And as soon as the system is installed, you will be ready to use Ubuntu 20.04 on your VirtualBox machine. So this is how the installation works. And once the installation is done, you are ready to use Ubuntu 20.04 on your VirtualBox. So next up, we have the benefits of virtualization. Now let's look at the benefits. First of all, most important thing where virtualization does is it reduces expenses. It reduces the expense of buying new hardware, new resources, new storage, and thereby it increases the agility. It increases the efficiency because basically when you virtualize any resource, then you are optimizing its utilization. What you're doing is increasing its efficiency. For example, if you use three different servers at 30% capacity to do a work, and then use a hypervisor and virtualize those resources and use the same thing as one server with 90% capacity, that is much more productive and efficient. Also, third benefit is enhancing the resilience in disaster management. So anything can happen with disaster management. Your physical resources may be corrupted, they may get destroyed in a fire, etc., etc. But when you virtualize your resources, they are always present. So this helps in enhancing the resilience of disaster management because you don't have physical resources present. And there is the faster provisioning of resources because you get to choose what kind of resource allocation goes on in your own system. And finally, we come to the future scope of virtualization. Now, what we see from our research is that virtualization has moved to the cloud now. 45% of businesses are moving their servers to the cloud. Everything is getting virtualized. There are hosting websites, there are servers that can be used by cloud computing, and this is the future. Server hypervisor is used as a commodity in one third of the IT organizations that are present today. And finally, we have the fact that virtualization is moving beyond servers. So in the next 2 to 3 years, there will be network virtualization, which is very less at this point of time, but it will double. That is what is expected. All in all, virtualization is the future and is the key building block to cloud computing. And with that, I end today's session. Thank you for listening and have a good day.
I hope you have enjoyed listening to this video. Please be kind enough to like it, and you can comment and queries, and we will reply them at the earliest. Do look out for more videos in our playlist and subscribe to Edureka channel to learn more. Happy learning!